Okay, everyone, we're going to go through some skill building to help you through your projects. And we're going to focus tonight on rendering. So I'll be showing some examples of different ways to render, and then I will do some demonstrations of a couple methods that are common with the tools you probably might have at home. So in first, kind of going through the different types of rendering, we have rendering just with colored pencil. So all of you guys should have gotten a basic colored pencil set. So that will keep you moving forward. I'll show you tonight how to use some of the rendering markers. I tend to have people hold off on buying these because they can be pretty expensive. So we'll go through the different types tonight. And then computer rendering. So some of you might already be taking other classes. As you know, with the projects, you typically are given a choice to do them digitally or by hand. So if you're proficient in computer rendering, by all means, have at it, or want to practice computer rendering too. So colored pencil is probably the most inexpensive solution. They're pretty simple to use. There's a wide array of types to choose from. There's professional grade pencils. So Prismacolor is probably the standard for professional colored pencils. There's also Blick Art makes a nice brand. There's other professional brands, some European brands, Faber-Castell. So you can go to an art store like Blick and pick up the colors. There's usually little practice scratch pads around, get a feel for what you like. I tend to stick with the Prismacolor only because my eye has developed certain associations with color, and I'm used to the Prismacolor. It's kind of like being used to the big box of Crayola crayons when you're little, and then your parents buy you the knockoff brand and the colors all are a little bit wrong. So I tend to like the Prismacolor for that. I think that's more industry standard, but there are some nice alternate brands around, and sometimes those are less expensive. And then there's the student grade colored pencil. So these are what you would find at any big box store like Target or Walmart. So in a bind, you could run out and grab a set and work with them. And then there are hard leaded types of colored pencils, and these don't work well for rendering. We kind of need that soft lead to spread out on the paper. So Prismacolor Verithin are ones that you will see. They're a very hard, thin lead pencil, so they don't work well for coloring plans. They do work well for designing with different colors. So it's more of like a pencil lead that you would draw with instead of color. So here's an example of a plan that has been colored only in colored pencil. So you can see that this designer uses a really nice combination of colors and starts to overlay the strokes of colors to give some depth. One of the things I like about rendering with colored pencils is that they scan very well. So maybe they don't look as vibrant in person, but something happens when you scan them that they really read well on scanned copies. And I think that definitely shows up on this plan. And then we have rendering markers. So rendering markers are expensive. They're usually priced from $3 to $6 per pen. Sometimes you can buy sets. We'll talk about the dreaded Prismacolor set on the next slide. These pens have they have a very kind of a thin, watery ink, and the agent that spreads them out is usually alcohol or xylene in the pens. So some people are very sensitive to xylene, which is a type of solvent. So that's something to be aware of. If you tend to have a sensitivity to fumes, the xylene pens can get quite strong. We've had incidents when we've been all rendering in the classroom with xylene pens, and it's just, boy, it's quite an environment, so we try and keep the doors open. Some people are very frustrated by the lack of ink control with rendering pens. It does take a bit of getting used to. If you're someone who you know, as a child, always wanted to color inside the lines, and then you're given these rendering pens and they tend to bleed and be watery. That can be frustrating. I think one of two things happens. You either get a feel for how to lay down the pens after some trial and error, or you appreciate the kind of loose artistic nature that they're almost like watercolor type pens. So you stop trying to control it and just learn to live with that softer, more artistic look. These pens can be really long lasting if capped tightly and stored at room temperature. I have a bunch of pens that I bought when I was a student at Southwestern College 20 years ago. So they do dry out, you know, and you do have to replace them, especially if it's color they use, but they do also last a long time if you're not using them a lot. So, you know, so you shouldn't be too afraid to invest in colors that you like. Chartpak ad markers are commonly used in the landscape industry. I'd say those are probably the most common, at least for all the firms that I've worked for or owned. And those use that xylene solvent. So they tend to be more watery, more watercolor-like. They have a lot more bleed to them. Prismacolor were the pens that I liked when I was a new designer because I wanted my ink to stay within the lines. So that's another common pen that is used. Those are an alcohol base, so they're a little less fumes that go with them. So people who are sensitive to the xylene might be more comfortable with the Prismacolor pens. They also have double tips. So they have a thick tip and a thin tip. So when I was younger, I like that a lot. Copic is kind of the gold standard. We all want Copic, but we can't afford them. So these are expensive pens, but one of the things that's nice about them is they are refillable. So you can buy the ink and recharge them. So, you know, it's a European style pen. And so they're probably a little bit more sustainable than we are. And I thought this was a really nice color chart. It doesn't seem to be online anymore, but Jim Liggett has written a book and does some really great kind of blending of digital technology with markers and pencils. He very much is about using the technology to take shortcuts and perspectives, but then softening that that very hard technology with the artful nature of pens. And as you can look at this, I don't know if you can see, like down in this purple area, see how these are the ad markers. See how they're watering, they kind of bleed out outside the lines. I think as a designer, you evolve to kind of liking that. But early on, it can be a challenge if you're just always trying to control where these pen colors are going. So this is a nice example because he's using 3 different types of paper here. So he's using trace or sketch paper. And you can see that the pens are really light and almost pastel-like when used on trace. And then this is like kind of your regular bond paper, right? So the colors get more vibrant. And then he uses this special clay-coated paper, and that really makes the pens vibrant. So the pen colors can look differently depending on what you're rendering on. So the trace and vellum tend to be these soft, very, you know, stained glass looking renderings. So some colors are too loud for landscape renderings. This is a nice pen list. I think this is very much, you know, appropriate for buildings and landscapes. But I always see like the Prismacolor sets are on sale. And when you start looking at the colors of them, they can be super bright and garish and not really things we'd use in the landscape. So if you see those sets on sale, be careful what colors you're buying because you might find that they're not that usable. They can be very affordable to get them that way, but the colors are really a lot of times designed for animation. A lot of animators use these types of pens, so they can be very vibrant. So anyway, I'm gonna post this list of pen colors. It doesn't seem to be available online anymore, but luckily I saved a copy back in the day. So thank you, Mr. Liggett. And then I like the markers plus a pencil overlay example. So I'm going to focus on showing you that tonight. And this is an example of a project I did years ago up in San Diego. And so what I found with markers is that they tend to look more attention getting in person. But then when you run them through a scanner like this, it's almost like the scanners are too good and it starts picking up on all the lines of the pens where they cross over one another. So it really tends to tone down. The images just don't look as vibrant as when they're in person once they're scanned. So I think that might be a driver for which type of rendering style you're focused on. You know, is it going to be scanned into a document or your portfolio, or pictures do a pretty good job now, you know, for showing the rendering a little bit better. And then unfortunately, this image is a bit not the level of clarity I'd like, but this is an example of markers plus pencil overlay. And this is a style that Richard Scott teaches. He's a fabulous teacher and artist, lives up in the Pomona area, was one of my teachers at Cal Poly Pomona. So Richard has a number of different workshops. He's kind of a private teacher, teaches when he feels like it guy now. He's really focused on sketching right now. So he's written some books on sketching. So if you're interested in sketching, check out his website. But sometimes he will do these rendering workshops, and he does teach this marker plus pencil overlay. And I don't think anybody does it better than Richard. He really comes at it from the training of an artist. And so he really understands how light falls across different objects, and I think does a fabulous job. So with digital renderings, there's a lot of different programs that are being used. It's important to understand that these programs are very, very expensive for the most part. I think SketchUp's probably the exception to that. It's better now that Photoshop and Illustrator, you know, you can get a subscription to the suite pretty cheap, especially as students. I think it's like $20 a year or $20 a month. Sorry. But in the old days, to buy those programs would have been about $800 each. So not only they're expensive, but they need really advanced computer processing to run them. They need lots of RAM, or random access memory. When you're running graphics, they need a lot of memory. The solid state drives are really a godsend to some of these when we're in kind of rendering and modeling programs. So if you're looking for a new computer, you'll want to look for those types of things. Also, you want to make sure that you have a separate graphics card. You're not relying on the computer's own graphic card. You want something really designed for gaming that has to do a lot of rendering and big 3D kind of modeling quickly. So thank you to gamers for making technology more affordable and accessible for us designers. Many of these require a huge time commitment to learn the programs. And these are great for projects that you want to use the graphics for advertising. Maybe you're designing a park and they're going to have community meetings and they're going to have to post the rendering online, or you're developing a new community and the developer wants to use that rendering for advertisement or create brochures with it. So things can double like that. So think about when you're using computer graphics, how those will be used. The most common programs that I see being used are Photoshop and Illustrator. Sometimes we'll use AutoCAD to render, not so often anymore. Both my key staff and I are really good at Photoshop. We've both all done a lot of Photoshop renderings. SketchUp too. When SketchUp's being used, it's usually being combined with a plug-in program like Lumion, especially for 3D renderings, which make things look a little bit more lifelike. If we're just doing plan views, SketchUp's probably okay. I think the challenge with SketchUp is It's a nice, affordable program. It's not a building information modeling program like the more technical 3D modeling is, but it is really good for conceptual design, and it's pretty easy to learn. What I've found is that to do basic things in SketchUp is pretty quick and easy. But once you start really trying to make surfaces look lifelike and different textures, it starts taking a lot of time. And that's where the Jim Liggett style, he really uses programs like SketchUp to crunch, getting a perspective just right. And then he spits out a bunch of boxes. He prints out a bunch of boxes and then overlays those, and he uses those hand drawing overlays to kind of merge the digital and hand style graphics together. So I think it's a nice offering. He's got some books and things written too, so it might be something to check out. So here's a couple examples. This is one my office recently did, and my right-hand person she has a style of rendering that's really beautiful. It's very light and watercolor-like. You can see how she softens the edges of it, and it's a really just kind of restful, peaceful type of rendering. So that's a great example of her style. And I tend to have a bolder style. So this is an example of my style. And what happens with all of these is you start to create this library of different trees and graphics. So you have your, whatever program you're working in, you can just pop, these symbols in and put your shadows in and start to give things depth and dimension. So couple different examples there of digital rendering. So we'll go into showing you how to do some pencil and marker rendering next.